In this video, I want to spend a couple minutes talking about your sculpting tools. I also want to go over and talk a little bit about your sculpting layers. In this example, I have a simple cube. I created it via the Mudbox menu. Create, Mesh, and Cube. The first thing I must do is increase my subdivisions. Underneath Mesh, I can add a new subdivision. I can also hit Shift plus D. I'm going to take this up to level 6, and maybe 7 or 8. Remember that your mesh is also dependent on the size of your actual topology coming in. So if your base mesh is really low, you might be able to push it to 8 or 9. If your mesh is a little higher coming in, you might only want to push it to 4 or 5. With your base or standard meshes inside of Mudbox, you can push these a little bit higher. The first thing I want to do is take a look at my sculpting brush. If I come in here and do a sculpt, it's going to pull my information forward, or pull that topology forward in space. Over on my right side, I've got size and strength, along with mirror options. Let's take a look at mirror really quick. The first thing I want to do is reduce my size. If you're not sure about the size that you're getting, take a look at your actual size on screen. If you hold down B and left mouse button, you can resize your brush with ease. You can also manually enter a number in here if that's more comfortable for you. Your strength is sometimes set to default at 15. That could be just a little too high. What I would do is vary your values between 2 and 6. With mirror on, if I hit X, as I'm sculpting, it's going to project on the opposite side. Y, top and bottom, and with Z in the opposite Z-axis. You can also choose locals and tangents. What's important to note is that your object must be symmetrical. So if you bring an object in that is not based on symmetry, you may have problems with your sculpting. Invert functions will push my information in. I can also play with my options here and do a negative amount. Here, with invert on and a negative number, it actually pushes my information forward. The next option that's really great is your stamp image. Stamps are a great way to add information to your surface. Here, you have an option of stamps at the bottom. You can also create your own stamps in Photoshop or any other image editing software. By selecting these, the image is going to appear in your window here. You can choose options to randomize and even an offset. There is stamp spacing and also ability to snap to curve, which we'll talk about in a minute. With options for stamps, you can create some very interesting detail. Play with your brush options and size to play with the size of your stamp. At the top, you'll see sculpt and paint layers. If I'm doing all of this information or sculpting work on one layer on my cube, the problem is that I don't have a lot of control over the value that I'm creating. So what I want to do is create this information on a layer. The first thing you want to do is create your layer. Over at the right, where it says New Layer, click on this once. Your sculpting layer will be activated. You can double click and change the name based on the sculpt you're creating. This will help you stay organized. At the bottom, I'm going to choose to play with different stamps. In this case, I'll choose a brick pattern. I still have symmetry turned on. If I want to reduce the opacity or strength of this, I can go to the strength value. This will help reduce the actual intensity of that effect. You cannot go higher than 100%. When you're sculpting, make sure that you don't push your values to extreme. For instance, choose your actual value based on what you visually see. If you see deformation on your surface that's looking muddy or dark, these are artifacts that are created when you're pushing your values just too high. When creating normal maps eventually, in other words, extracting the sculpting information to apply to your low poly, you're going to get artifacts that will definitely hurt the surface information and create a result that you're not happy with. I don't see much here, but I can tell this is a little hot. To reduce this information, you can go down to smooth. Here, always reduce your strength and work from a low number up. I'm going to turn symmetry off in this case. I'm also going to reduce the size of my brush. Going over your surface like this will help prevent any weird anomalies from forming. Remember, if you want things to really stand out, incorporate that into your base mesh, such as appendages, any type of information like horns, ears, and so on. Relax will relax the surface. Each one of these options will have simple settings over here on the right. Remember to add more layers as you're working. This will allow you a lot more control than if you work on the basic cube settings. Grab, pinch are great options. But again, when generating our normals for our game asset, this could be a problem on the actual base mesh. I would avoid using grab and pinch as much as possible. Pinching, however, will do some great work for creases. I would lean more to the pinch than I would the grab as far as usage. Flatten and foamy both can come in handy, especially when you're working with your stencils. Again, watch that strength. 15 is your basic standard size or mount, and it's still always too hot. Spray repeat, and again, use your stamps. Imprint will allow you to select, in this case, a stamp, and drag it across the surface. What's nice about this option is that you can scale it. It gives you a small silhouette or example of the stamp that you're going to drop, and then brings in the information. You can layer. Notice that the smaller I drag, the information, of course, is smaller. The larger will cover more of an area. Using layers, you can create some really good groundwork here with this particular stamp. Wax will create a wax-like effect on your surface. It flattens as it actually crosses your surface area, as your brush grazes it, and almost melts the surface. When we talk about masking, you might be able to mask areas and fill in areas with this particular tool. Scraping can add some hard edges to surfaces. And fill will also fill in areas for you. No need to have your mask turned on for this. Knife. The nice thing about knife is that you can also use a stamp if you want. But with knife, what you want to do is make sure that you're not pushing the information in too much. In other words, if you push your values in too hard, you're going to get artifacts. One thing with knife that's nice is if you come here and want to create more of a slice in the surface, use this in combination with pinch. And maybe a little bit of smooth. Here you can create a really nice gash or crack that looks more natural, since most slashes or gashes or cuts will have a tapering effect over in the corners. Smear. This is one that I don't recommend you use, mostly because it creates so many artifacts in the surface. Best to use your stamps or stencils in this case. But that doesn't mean you can't play with it, and it doesn't mean you can't bring it on a very low value to go in there and make some changes. This might be a good option when you're simulating hair or playing with any kind of other watery type surface or look. Bulge does exactly what it says. Here's an example of some serious artifacts that are happening. To avoid this, don't have your intensity very high. And probably don't do what I just did by going over some surface information. But you can also come in here and relax it or smooth it. If you tend to get more issues as you're working, always do undo. Amplify will amplify the effects in that area. If you're feeling that you're just not getting enough information, choose Amplify. The rest of these we'll talk a little bit later. But spend some time getting used to your actual tools in here and try to master some of these controls, practicing never to use strength at 15 or higher, and always trying to manipulate your size of your brush. Practice using layers and use them often. It's okay to have many layers in here. You'll be happy with the results later. If you choose everything on your actual main layer, you might have issues when going back to fix things.